Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to another episode of What's in the Performance, the series where I take scores and performances and break them down to analyze what goes into them and then share them with all of you. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Beethoven's Sonata in C sharp minor, Opus 27 number 2, Sonata quasi una fantasia, or as we all know it, the Moonlight Sonata, Presto Agitato. I said agitato really weird. Presto Agitato. You probably know this piece, right? Because the Moonlight Sonata is one of Beethoven's most popular and famous pieces. It was really popular back in the day when he first wrote it, and I'd say that it's still super popular now. The name alone probably conjures up memories of soft music wafting over you, the first opening notes of the first movement, which evokes an image of this moon, this full moon rising over a lake in the middle of the night, and the waves are softly lapping onto the shore. It's very dreamlike and very trance-like. But to me, the name Moonlight Sonata has always been a bit of a misnomer. First off, the name became attached with the piece after Beethoven's death. But the second thing that I have an issue with is that a lot of the techniques that are used to play the first movement in such a dreamy way, I feel comes only in the Romantic period, after Beethoven. No doubt Beethoven was a lot of the reason why a lot of these techniques were developed, but they didn't really come to fruition until after him. Not that I think you're wrong for playing it that way, right? You can play it however you want, but for me personally, I just don't interpret Beethoven that way, and feel free to fight me in the comments below. Daniel Barenboim, very famous conductor, pianist, who probably plays more dexterously and more technically and more beautifully at the age of 80 than I do at the age of 21. He has a very good video on the interpretation of the first movement that I'll link up here or down below. But the third movement, at the very least, I think we can all agree on this. The third movement does not evoke imagery of moonlight. And to be fair, the moniker was only given for the first movement. But the third movement definitely does not, because that would be some really deadly moonlight. Like, yeah, that's a very aggressive, deadly moonlight that's just beaming down on you with UV rays reflected off the sun, just with murderous intent. So whether you love this piece and listen to it only for fun, or whether you're someone learning it or intending to learn it sometime in the future, since this is a piece that a lot of people have in their sights that they want to master at some point in their piano careers, I hope that this episode will give you some better understanding of what goes on behind the scenes when it comes to playing this movement. So let's get it. So the first thing I'll say is that we are going over my performance, right? So this is all entirely my opinion. Feel free to disagree with how I interpret Beethoven. But Beethoven is one of the composers that I am more comfortable with, simply because I've played a lot of Beethoven and I feel like I vibe pretty well with Beethoven. But other people's performances that are really good of this sonata are people like Claudio Arrau, Daniel Barenboim, of course, and the one that's been most recent that sticks out is Valentina Lisitsa's, because she plays absolutely like off the charts fast, and it's insane to listen to. Even though we're just talking about my interpretation and me playing how I played, right? A lot of the things that I tried to do, you can hear in their performances as well. So I want to start off with 3 points before I get into reviewing my own performance, and they are tempo, touch, and personal interpretation. I think these are all very important aspects of how we interpret a piece. So first, let's talk about tempo. I've seen a video somewhere that apparently in one of the earlier versions of this, perhaps that Czerny had, the tempo marking was somewhere around 100 or like 92 or something like that. And that's apparently what Beethoven considered presto. I don't know the validity of that statement. I'm no historian, but I'll take that guy's word for it since he seemed pretty knowledgeable. Yeah, I didn't play at 92. I think 92 is a bit slow. But compare that to, again, Valentina Lisitsa, who averages around 185. I think that gives you a bit of a picture of just how wide of a range the acceptable presto tempo really is, right? Presto is not just a set metronome number. Presto is an energy, right? It's a feeling. Tempos are more like energies and feelings that you're trying to achieve by playing at a certain speed. And that's how I think about choosing a tempo in general. Tempo is always a tool to be used for expression, a tool to be used to create energy and feeling, right? Tempo is not something that you just strive for meaninglessly. Playing fast for no reason just means that you're playing with no control or without purpose, and what's the point in that? We're always trying to make music, right? That's the first goal of every musician, make music, and the tempo works always in service of that. The second thing I'll say about tempo is that the way that I was taught Beethoven is that the tempo in Beethoven is very inflexible. I wouldn't say inflexible to the point of no fluctuations, right? But it sticks very much so to the beat. There are papers that I've read, and stuff like that I've seen online that dispute this, but needless to say, after playing like this for years, this is how I hear Beethoven, and this is how I do Beethoven. Now that's not to say I play robotically, but it's to say that when you do slow down, when you do push the tempo, it should be something that's more felt rather than obvious, right? And that's the sort of things that I go for. Obviously, in this performance, I do stretch the tempo very noticeably at certain spots, and I do push the tempo a little bit at certain spots, but overall, the heuristic is that we're going for feels, like the feeling of a pull, the feeling of a push, rather than an obvious one. Point number 2, touch. So in the Mozart video, I talked about having a sparkly touch. And for this, I want to talk about having a spicy touch. What do I mean? So a sparkly touch is done by articulating very clearly, right? By lifting each finger and intentionally placing it down, but not being heavy with it, right? And it's all finger. A spicy touch gets closer to a staccato than a sparkly touch. Spicy touch is a bit of like that plucking staccato, but like not quite. Which makes it still a bit more connected, but gives it an interesting texture. The second thing is a really smooth touch. So this comes out perhaps most apparently in the left hand with the already bass, but like sometimes I'll even drag the note, right? Like I'll leave the finger on and carry over onto the next note when it should be lifted. And that's how you get like almost like a glued together, like stretchy feel. In fact, sometimes I'll even play with flat fingers in order to get that touch. But if you're a beginner, don't play with flat fingers, ever. And now point number 3, personal interpretation or how I read emotion in this piece. To me, this piece seems to sing of a very deep desire, a deep yearning that someone has that they know can never be achieved, can never come true. And it's this tension that creates a lot of the anger that I hear in this piece. For me, I read this into the piece because around the time I picked this up, your boy got rejected. Sad boy hours. And this piece really spoke to that a lot. There is still a very expressive element to this that I love a lot, even though I have successfully recovered since. But with all 3 points being said, let's get to my performance and we'll see how they come together. All right, and we're here set up in front of the monitor with the score here at the piano. We're getting ready to review this performance. Now, fair warning, this is going to be quite lengthy, so strap down, buckle up your seatbelts, and get into this. This is going to be quite comprehensive, so feel free to come back to this at other times, right, as you're working on this piece. And I'll try to have timestamps where applicable, right, because those things. Well, we'll see how this plays out. But yeah, this is going to be quite a lot. It's going to be very exhaustive and comprehensive, which is great if you're looking for a one-stop shop to learning this piece. So here we go. So we're already beginning to get some of that spicy touch that I was talking about earlier, right? That really almost staccato-y feel to the notes that's coming through in the runs here, right? So actually, one of the ways that I practice this, these runs, is by playing them staccato, like the plucking staccato too, slowly, like that. Because when you speed it up, you're not going to be able to pluck each and every single note. I certainly wasn't. And as a result, it smooths out into the spicy touch that I was talking about. So this becomes by necessity, right? By physical limitations. So again, it's almost like a plucking feel, like when we get down to it. But it's a lot of that articulation, right? From lifting the fingers really high, as you can even see in my performance, but with less contact, with more sharp articulation and more of a pluck and a shorter period of contact is what I meant to say, shorter period of contact. And of course, all these runs are played this way, right? It gives them a lot of character and a lot of flavor. It has like a certain texture to them. It's going to be contrasted later. The left hand obviously is written staccato here. So I take this very staccato as it is. Articulate the first one, right? Because that's where we're starting. And then, when we get to these chords, right? So how do we play these chords? These chords there's a sforzando, right? Sforzandos are different from accents because sforzandos have to be played within the dynamic, right? So the dynamic here is a piano. So how do we get like this punch, right? This musical punch in a piano dynamic? Basically, it boils down to two things, right? That we have to be cognizant of. One, we can't be harsh. With forte, we can come down from above, right? We can slam down into the keys and get that sort of punch, right? A really sharp attack from the hammer. But because it's piano, it can't become harsh. So how do we do that? I do that two ways. First is by how I make contact with the keys, right? In order to play this sforzando, I'm not coming down from above, as I said before, but rather I'm pushing in with weight, right? Like that. So it's almost like you're starting with your fingers planted on the keys like this, and using the weight from your arm, you push in like this, right? It's a push into the keys that's almost horizontal. It's not vertical coming down onto the keys, but it's like a horizontal push that's like, I guess like at a 45-degree angle, you could almost say, right? It's push in, like quick push in, right? And it's the addition of this arm weight that helps keep this from becoming harsh, right? Where coming down like that becomes very slammy and very harsh. Second way we do this is by adding on-beat pedal, right? So if you notice, the entire run is very dry, and it is in order to help maintain that spicy characteristic and texture. But once we get to this part, I add on-beat, and most other people do this too. You add on-beat pedal, so right when you press the note, your foot goes down on the pedal. You have to trust me that I'm doing this because you can't see my foot, but you can see the dampers in the video go up when I press down like this. And what that does is, one, it creates more resonance, more of this reverb effect, so it gets bigger, right? Which adds to the volume, adds to the punch. But second, it means that I don't need to press quite as hard, right? I don't need to put as much weight. I don't need to push down on the keys as much to get the sound that I'm looking for. So I can essentially play almost like which is not what I did, but like I could play a mezzo forte, add on beat, and I end up at a forte. And as a result, we don't get as sharp of an attack from the hammers, and we don't get the harshness that comes along with that. And so using these two techniques, by adding weight and on beat pedal, we're able to play this sforzando in such a way that it's a punch, but it's not like you're getting clocked in the face out of nowhere, right? And it adds a nice bit of texture on top of that too, right? Because here in my performance, at least, it sounds like I hold the pedal and I come up on the second chord, right? So it's connected more so than perhaps another performance would be. But because I'm lifting, right, there's still a staccato feel to it. There's still a staccato texture within the pedal sustain. So essentially, we end up with a bunch of runs which are super spicy, right? And then sforzando, push in with weight, right? So all finger and then arm weight, right? And that in and of itself creates a contrast. So we can hear it again on the grand piano, which is more apparent than on this, I think, on a keyboard. Not that you can't do it on a keyboard and that it doesn't add something on a keyboard, but the resonances that's created by doing this on the grand piano are a little bit more apparent, IMO. Unless you have a really good like VST or whatever, then those things replicate this pretty well. But yeah, so spicy, right? Weight. Push and weight. My tone is a bit harsh, I'm going to admit. But you get the idea, right? Is this weight, and this is applicable across like all music, all play. And here, this is the contrast, right, between the earlier section, which is super spicy, super sharp, staccato-y, and now it becomes super smooth, right? There's a legato pedal on every eighth, right? So we're connecting the notes but not making it mushy. So if I held the pedal for like on the quarter, right? It kind of creates this like weird texture where notes are bleeding into each other. But if I change every eighth, then it adds to the gluey feel without making it muddy. And that's what we're going for. Now, the other thing to note here is that in the right hand, we have this repeated G sharp, right? And this G sharp is the unimportant note in this series, right, of notes. I don't know if I would necessarily call this a run, but it's unimportant because it's repeating and it gets boring. So the note that should be voiced, which is, I'm saying this, but it's kind of obvious, but a lot of people will still play it with the same volume, is right, the bottom note in the right hand. And actually, voicing this is not that difficult in this instance because of the fact that it's almost like a tremolo motion, like this, right, like back and forth, rolling of the wrist. So it's not just fingers going up and down, but it's a rolling of the wrist, right, back and forth. And because your thumb is heavier than your pinky, it naturally will come down harder onto the note. And since we're in a forte, since we're voicing that note, it's very easy to just let the weight of the thumb and this index finger when you switch the fingers to voice out that note for you. There might be a bit of a question on whether we voice the right hand more or the left hand, but I think that comes down to a judgment call, right? Like, for what it's worth, when I was processing through and like interpreting this piece, I wanted the left hand a little bit more since it's just written straight eighths, and I wanted to really draw out that legato, right? And so my left hand is very heavy in this playing, but they come out about the same, right? Because they're pretty close, and the right hand is pretty heavy on the thumb. But it's super important to stretch that, right? We want that gluey feel. Connect when you can, right? Don't just rely on the pedal. The pedal adds the extra glue, right? But it's not the glue in and of itself. It's the cherry on top. So you have to connect in your left hand as best as you can to create that legato feel. And I almost drag, right, the notes. Like, my hand is tensed, right, in a way that allows me to drag like almost each note into the next. It's not like tense like this, but it's tense like this. I don't know if you can see on the camera up there, but it's like a little bit tense so that I'm dragging each note into the next. And here, right, there's no crescendo written, but I play crescendo anyways because I'm building to that G sharp, so. What's the important note, right? The one in the middle, and the one that's changing up here, right, in the left hand. Land, right? Land with articulation, not from above. So we're coming, yes, we are coming from above because it's a jump, but here, right before you press the note, you're coming down and you're pushing in with weight and on beat pedal and staying on that note. Breathe. Right, breathing is super important. I sometimes forget to breathe. But that's how this goes, right? There's this like the smooth part, and then instantly we get contrast, right, with staccato, and then land. It's almost like a finishing statement, but then question mark, right? We had this really angry section just roll through, and what's gonna come next? Breathe, good. Spicy, right? On beat, pedal. On beat, again. Okay, this one's interesting. Okay, before we get into the next section, here in the score is written this last run has a slur over it, right? So this is legato, and there's a crescendo that's written there. Now, most recordings that I hear, people will add pedal here to help with that, to help with the legato, and like increasingly like pedalize as it gets towards the end. What I do instead is I try to vary the texture of my touch. So the parts before, right, very spicy. The super articulated, fingers lifted high, almost staccato-y. But here, I'm connecting, right? So I start off kind of staccato-y, but then I slowly fade into super connected, right? To the point where I'm almost not playing on the tips of my fingers anymore, but closer to the pads. And I'm doing this in the left hand a little bit too, although there's still staccatos written there, so. Right, so you can hear kinda it come through on this recording because, I mean, this technique is more subtle than adding pedal, and to be sure, a lot of pros do this and add pedal. So if I would have a critique for myself, maybe a touch of like half pedal right at the end to start giving it a bit of an impression, or to add to that sort of feeling before we jump into the next section, which is completely pedalized right on the quarter. But again, the reason why I didn't want to add pedal, or one of the reasons why I didn't want to add pedal, is to create still that contrast between this section and the next, and because I think it's more artistic and nuance in the way that you do it with touch as opposed to pedal. But that's just me, right? You can add pedal if you want. I just wouldn't add a lot of pedal. I wouldn't hold the pedal for the whole 2 measures. I would change either every quarter or half pedal, and then like increasing amounts of pedal towards the end of the run. So something like, yeah, this pedal can do half pedal. It has varying degrees of on and offness, I guess, but it still doesn't compare to, you know, a real pedal doing half pedal. And again, this is not a knock against electric pianos because electric pianos are great, but this is just one of the differences that I wish, you know, I could do on this. But go back 5 seconds to here. Right, smooth is increasing in smoothness. You can even see my fingers get flatter and flatter. But here. Yeah, right hand gets flatter and flatter. There we go. This is my favorite section of the whole piece. Or I guess my favorite theme. So what's important to know here? Okay, so a few things to know. First, a lot of people, when they get to this section, drop the tempo by several clicks. So like, for example, Valentina Lisitsa starts off at like 190, right? She gets to here and she drops to 170. Because this is very melodic, right? This is very melodic, and it's a section that needs time to sing and to breathe. Because of that, and because of the ways that I interpret tempo in Beethoven, right, with like the strictness in the speed, in the tempo, this is the bottleneck for me, right? Like this is what restricts the tempo for the rest of the piece for me. Because once I get over 140, 145, my left hand becomes very hard to control, right? And it becomes like, it feels like it becomes a rattling mess, right? Like, it's very difficult to play in a piano, right? That's satisfying, at least to me, right? With the swells that I'm looking for. It becomes a very mezzo piano, mezzo forte, even with changing the pedal a lot, even with like very light articulation, right? And again, that's my fallacy, my deficit as a pianist, and partially instrument, mostly me, right? But also, the melody, I think, requires a lot of space to sing the way that it needs to, right? So if I were to sing this melody, right, which I'm going to do right now, it would go something like bum, bum, right? So bum, breathe, bum, ba-da-ba-da-dum, bum, breathe, da-dum, right? That's where the hairpins are, right, in the score. Da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-dum, right? And this is this very tender, like sort of yearning feeling, da-da-da-dum, bum, right? Like that. And it almost takes space and time to come out that way, right? If you went boom, boom, ba-da-dum, boom, you could, right? Ba-dum, ba-da-dum, but it feels like you're jerking up and down. And that's what I guess at a higher tempo, I was unable to phrase the way that I wanted to, right? Because it then did feel like it was jerking up and down. Instead, I wanted to be da-da-da-da-bum, bum, you know? So that's why I took it as slower tempo, entirely because of sections like these throughout the piece. But I absolutely love these sections, right? Because it's just so tender, right? And there's just this like feeling that's like underneath the surface that's just like there, and there's like a storm that's there, right? That's just hidden underneath the surface that's threatening to break out. And that's what this piece is like to me, right? So we land here, right? Fifth finger, fourth finger, take your pick, right? But bit of weight. We're placing this note, wrist down, like going down towards the key, towards the right. Breathe. Or lift. Each note in this turn has to be clear, right? You can't mush them together. Boom. The G is lower, or the F double sharp is lower. Again, the way you get this crescendo is by putting weight into the arm. Weight, and then less weight, so then you get the natural. And then you land with weight on the A sharp, right? Again, to bring that articulation. It's like the down up of the slur as it's written. So place, weight, like arm weight, not weight. Chotomate. And then lift, right? So, because there's a staccato written there. So, anyways, this is essentially what happens every time this sort of motif comes back. So I'm playing faster here, right? And you can hear the pedal slowly get away from me at some parts. And again, that's why I want to play slower. Yeah, I'm pedaling on the quarter. Again, this needs the pedal, right, to add that like sort of feel and vibe to it, that atmosphere. But if you add too much pedal, then it becomes a gloopy mess, and we don't want that. It still needs to be clear and clean. Yeah, so this is the contrast, right? We're getting back to a sharp feel, and the left hand changes to do that too. Right, so like the left hand, right, is transitioning from being really smooth, right? So what I'm doing here from the start, if you notice, the left hand is just, the fingers are staying very close to the keys, and all the movement essentially comes from like, yeah, a little bit of finger lifting, but also the wrist turning, right? Like this. And even if I didn't add pedal, right? I'm dragging the G sharp, the A sharp, the B, right? The important notes. so that it gives it that sort of gluey feel, as though there is a pedal being held. The pedal, again, is just the cherry on top. So, very small and very connected. But once we get to the crescendo, what happens? We start to open up, right? The wrist movements get bigger and bigger, and we're lifting the fingers more and more to then start detaching from that gluey feel and to give it more articulation back to that sort of like spicy feel, except because this is an Alberti bass, it becomes a little bit more rattly, right? Like we're racing towards the finish, right? With articulation. Increasing in size in left hand movements. And now this is when we're really going up and down, right? Lots of wrist. And then boom, land with weight pushing in, right? So a quick note about the right hand. This, because it's sharp, it's staccato, right? So at first I had like some thoughts, like how do I hold this, right? Like, because I don't want it to be too short. But in the end, I decided that it adds to texture, and I actually quite like it, right? And the little bits of pedal help sustain it enough. And if you're going at fast enough of a speed, right? It's not too short in context, I should say. If you're going slow, that's kind of disgusting. But fortunately, we're not going that slow. But getting to the sforzandos here, again, is weight from the arm pushing in. I'm not pushing my whole body weight in, right? We're not there yet. But it's a lot of arm weight pushing in. Pedaling on each time we move in the right hand, right? Because it's a new chord. Right, lots of weight. And then lots of weight here, right? A little bit of body, but mostly arm. Again, to keep it from being harsh. We change the pedal, get that on beat, and add that oomph to essentially the chord that we're playing. Yeah. The trill was a little bit messy, but that's okay. Yeah, rip. This was all practice. Again, this is super sparkly, right? Fingers lifted very high. The editor, I believe the editor to this edition is Claudio Rao. This Peter's edition. He has written tenutos here. I don't do them. I do them pretty short, right? Like, almost like staccato. Again, because I want to create the contrast from this section before, especially landing here. Boom, count, 1, 2, 3. Right? Important that we count right here. And that piano has to be really subito in every sense of the word, right? It has to be a surprise. Even this one, crescendo, we want to build up to a forte and then again, subito piano. And more, if you notice, right, the difference between this piano here, how I'm playing this Alberti bass, and the one here is that this one, again, small movements, but this one, we're still in that spicy sort of texture. So fingers are lifting very high, right? And you can see, you'll probably see that in the video too. Yeah, so my fingers are lifting higher there, right, in the video than they were earlier when I was going for that really smooth legato touch, right? But it's still a piano. Beethoven, again, master surprises, right? Quick changes in dynamics. These have to be super nailed in and important. And then boom, again, fortissimo, right? Weight, body weight, some body weight, lots of arm, and then boom, piano again. Syncopated slightly, now really syncopated. Right? Make sure you practice that with metronome. It has to be nailed down, or else it sounds garbage. And there's a crescendo, and then we get all the way up. But this is, again, sparkly, like spicy sparkly, right? Fingers lifted high, articulated. Yeah. And very dry as well. But that's all to build to that E, right? All this entire crescendo, all to the E, right? Now it's for, okay, at least for me, this is like the mountaintop crest of the piece, right? In my head, the way that I see this is almost like I'm at the top of a mountain. I'm like a bird or something, like an eagle. Or like I'm in those, like one of those paragliding suits or whatever, and I'm jumping off, right? And it's this feeling of flying through the air, right? In this like mountaintop experience where everything is just bright, the air is crisp, and it's like that, right? And there's just like this grand sense. And the way we get that, the way that I go about doing this, because of that, is a ton of weight into the keys. again. Like now we're adding some body, right? Coming through the arm, right? Through the arm here. And the left hand is going as hard as it can, right? Again, emphasizing the first note. Right? But really attacking that first note with like wrist, right? And some arm weight and pushing in a little bit, but without sacrificing the articulate feel. And strong, heavy pedal. Pedal just throughout. Pedal changes on the half. And it's almost like Beethoven wants this too, right? Because he has written forte on each and every single one of the half notes. Almost like he's like, hey, make sure you stay forte. Hey, I want this forte, more forte, right? And then we land, and then immediately, right? What happens? Again, master surprises. Boom, jump, change in texture, right? To a piano. So there's crescendo, right? Build. Bum, 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 bum. Right? The very subtle, right? Like, it almost gives a feeling like you're sneaking around somewhere. Like, like something's lurking below, like if we're talking about emotions again, something's lurking below the surface, right? Just like threatening to get, it's like you don't want to think it's there, but it's there. It's like knocking. It's like, hey, pay attention to me, right? And you're like, I don't want to think negative thoughts, but it's like, hey, I'm still here, right? And it's like that like the turmoil within, right? And this is what makes this, I think, very interesting and delicate. What's interesting, right, is that this part is really hard because you are voicing, right, in a staccato, right? So you're not making as much contact with the keys, but you can't lose the center note, right? The unimportant notes, because the harmony then falls apart. So. Right. And what's also interesting is that the left hand and the right hand moves in contrary motion. So there's almost like two melody lines here. Is like, right. And then the same thing with the other way. Right. And the melody switches between the top voice, the bottom voice in each hand. And it's like super interesting, super cute. And so for me, what I ended up doing is I decided to almost play it like, I guess the term is like stretto, right? Or I think the term is stretto, where both voices are like equally prominent, right? And this comes up in fugues when the theme is carried in two voices, then you play both voices at like the same loudness. So I'm applying that concept to this. So this D sharp is the lowest on the ladder, right? So I want to hear for each one. We've gone beyond spicy, now we're staccato. This is straight up staccato, and it's gotta be almost like that plucked staccato, but since it's piano and because it's fast, we can make do with like just a wristy sort of staccato or like fingery sort of staccato, either this or like this, right? And just being very short. Also, because of these notes, right? Because these notes are within the piano dynamic, the way we get them to stand out is by simply holding them longer, right? So first and foremost, there's no staccato written there. Second, we can also add a touch pedal to increase the sustain on these notes. So one thing that's important to remember is that longer notes feel louder. They may not necessarily be louder, right? But they feel louder than a note that's played for a shorter duration. You can vary the length of the notes to change the dynamic without changing actually the dynamic, except we're adding pedal to help. And we're landing on these notes, right? With the same softness and the same weight as we're doing with the rest of the staccatos, but we're holding it like a touch longer, right, as written, and we're adding a bit of pedal. And it creates the contrast that we're looking for. And then again, if we get here, important to hit these notes, right? But also keep them like piano, which is why later you'll hear me miss, because I tried to play two piano and then like don't bottom out the key, and then the hammer doesn't go all the way through to strike the string. Yeah. Right. Missed a bit of the melody there. Okay. So this part, right? There's a crescendo. There's no staccato anymore, but we're still maintaining a staccato-y feel, right? Right here, I'm trying to crescendo up to a mezzo forte, right? Because I still want contrast from the forte, right? So what I do in the video is on beat on literally every eighth. And that's, again, maintain the staccato feel while adding that oomph to separate it from this mezzo forte that might have become a forte by accident. On-beat pedal is your friend when it comes to Beethoven. Don't overuse the pedal to press, like hold down too long or too much, right? You want to keep things articulate, you want to keep things clean. If you're just using the pedal to make it louder, then consider on-beat, doing a lot of on-beat and working your foot. So going back to piano, right? Important to nail the bass notes. Oh, okay. So I added a bit of pedal, right, on. Even though it's written with staccatos. And I just did that because I feel like it adds a little bit of textural change. For the same reasons that I talked about earlier. Adding pedal here, right? I just wanted to feel like it's standing out a little bit more. Other performers, like for example, I think Rousseau on his channel, he adds pedal on each and every single one of them. And I feel like that just defies the staccato too much for me, which is, and it sounds a little bit weird, which is why I don't do it. I like having it at the last one, so it creates a bit of textural contrast. Ooh, this section. Very dark rooting, right? It's like the anger from the section before. There's a swell, right? Because there's a crescendo. The crescendo, right? Like you're about to come at as someone with something, but then you have to reel yourself back in, and as a result, you get this like simmering sort of like rage that's like below the surface that you just gotta shove down, right? Right. Again, we're going back to the gluey, smooth feel from earlier, but it's even more overtly so. This is as soft as it gets in the piece. So first, let's talk about left hand. Left hand, what I'm doing is I'm playing with essentially the pads of my fingers, right? Like here. So with flat fingers, but it's not flat like this, right? So on the keyboard, like it's not flat like this, but it's flat because I've strained out my fingers. So it's flat like this, right? Like almost like this, right? So you see the difference, right? Most beginners, when they play with flat fingers, play a lot like this, right? Or some of them play like this as well. But I see a lot of people with weak fingers will play like this. That's not what I'm doing. This is very harmful to your fingers. Rather, I'm playing just like this, right? And what happens when you play with flat fingers like this is that you can't lift your finger as much, right? And when it lands, it's not landing on the tip. You're unable to apply as much pressure, so you don't get as much of an articulation. And so that combined with me keeping my hand really close to the keys, right, enables me to create this like very low, simmering sort of sound, right, within the piano dynamics. And with the chords, that's exactly what I'm doing with my right hand too. But for the right hand, instead of it being mostly like a bit of finger and a bit of wrist, right, to go up and down, it's mostly arm, right? So the arm is just moving up and down like this, right? So there's a bit of finger, right? But the arm is just moving up and down, right? Like up and down like this. So but it slowly increases in weight, right? Because we're going somewhere, right? We're not just right. We're going to the D sharp. So, and again, the important note: D sharp, D sharp, D sharp, D sharp, D sharp, right? And the last one, right? That's when we add the weight to roll onto the D sharp, right? To give it that articulation and that placement. Finger. Right, and so again, this whole weight thing is just for chords, or I'm using it here just for the chords, so that I can get them even lower in dynamic, so that I can build it back up to the final note that I'm building towards, right? Even here. We're going somewhere, right? These can't all be the same. But yeah, we'll see what I did. Wait. So you feel a little bit of that build, and then build crescendo, and we fade from a very smooth touch to a spicy touch again, right? And lifting up on the pedal. So at first, here, the pedal's all the way down, but it's slowly coming up until very dry and a very articulate spicy touch again. And back to the spicy touch. So that gradient, I think, is quite nice, and that's something that you have to like practice to get to. So. Yeah, see, so very smooth, and no pedal, and then articulate. we're back to the spicy touch. Now we're just gonna hear a lot of the same things that I talked about earlier. Again, weight, arm weight, arm weight. Yeah, you see that in the video. Not as like overtly as I'm doing here for demonstration purposes, but you see my arm tense up as I play those notes. And again, the phrasing, articulation, land, right? I didn't breathe as much as I should have. I should have taken a bigger breath. Breathing is important. Breathing helps with phrasing, and it helps with your mental condition while you're playing. Yeah. So important to sing this part. So if you notice, I actually took a slightly more time, right? Like, it was barely noticeable, but again, goes back to what I said in the introduction. These tempo changes, I want to feel rather than make it obvious or overt. Also, on the repeat, I'm willing to take more artistic liberty because on the first time through, I've demonstrated that I can play within the rules. At least that's like the messed up way that I think about it in my head. So the second time through, I am much more willing to pull, to push, to stretch, right? Stuff like that. And that's what happened in this section. Left hand is a bit rattly. I wish it was a bit lower. And this section is nice. You know, come to think about it, as I'm hearing this again, I think there might have been better ways to work around the staccatos while maintaining the pedal-y feel for the left hand, right? Even though it's slowly becoming more articulate. But it is quite difficult, right? Given how fast it's going. You can't exactly damper down in between. But maybe half pedal. I can't do it here. Rip. Maybe it'll be something I try out next time I play this piece. Half pedal in this section, or quarter pedal even, just to give it a hint, or on the staccatos, just to give it a hint of glue, right? Wait, no. On beat, sparkle, subito piano, good. Wait, yeah. Are we on? Slight hiccup, but we were mostly on beat. And soaring mountaintop experience again. And now furtive staccatos. And the nice, like, right, like, that's another way you can do it, right? You don't necessarily have to play them louder or whatever, but with good articulation, even when it's softer, and it can be articulated and like fit within the overall piece. So what I did, this shocks me, right? Sometimes I notice interesting things in my own playing, which is incredible. It sounds like I went down in dynamic, right? Which is appropriate, right? Because the line is going down. But because it was placed so well, it still stands out and sticks out despite being softer. And that's what you're going for, right? If you're gonna bring down the dynamic, these important notes still have to stand out. And how do you make them stand out? Articulate, good placing. And also extending the length, as we talked about, slight on beat, stuff like that, right? It's a little bit harsh. I'm coming down from above a little bit too much there. I would like to come from, again, the 45 degree. I don't know exactly what it is, right? But with a little bit more weight to even that out, smooth that out. But here again, the gradient. Oh, we missed that. That's okay. So again, very spicy touch. Okay, so interesting thing to note is exactly the same as it occurs over here, right? But at the beginning it goes. So the first few times through, right, is something that's like a little bit difficult when you're working with memory. But it's important to have these sorts of like points where you're no longer just listening to yourself play as you're playing, when you're performing and caught up in your own mode, in your own playing or whatever. But you have to come back to consciousness, right? You just need to have these points like scattered throughout the piece to help remind you of where you are. And this is one of those points for me, right? Because I know that if this is something that I mess up every once in a while, like 5% of the time when I'm practicing and like mindlessly, then it's going to be something that I panic on when I'm performing, right? I'm gonna hit And it's at this point that I'll think to myself, wait, the next one is different, but I don't remember what I'm supposed to do. Which one is it? So, just the general note that I have here, right? Once I hit this, or once I even when I get to, right? I have made a note to myself that once I get here, the next thing that my left hand is doing is going down to an F, right? And because I go down to the F, then the muscle memory kicks in for my right hand. It's not foolproof, right? The best way to do it is consciously memorize all the notes. But there's so much to memorize that this is like a nifty little shortcut that I at least do for myself. You're using 50% muscle memory and 50% conscious recall. And that's how I keep myself on track there. That's a little bit uneven, but that's okay. That jump is a little bit hard, but again, so this is forte, right? And then the piano comes here. So that's why I hold the pedal until there. And this one has to be placed, right? Even though it's going for forte to piano, this still has to sing and stand out and shine. And now here we're just doing that melodic section again, except we're in a different key. We're in the subdominant key as opposed to the dominant key. Again. Right, so we go back. That was a little bit blurred, but I guess that's okay. And now we shift it to the left hand. The left hand has to sing the same way. But there we go. See, this is the weakest section for me throughout in the entire piece because it's hard to sing that way with the left hand, right? With the right hand, it's easy because the pinky and the ring fingers are so light. It's easy to put that weight into, right? To really control the weight. But because the left hand, again, I mean, obviously the hands are inverted, unless you have two right hands, you're going on and landing on your thumb, which is heavy and hard to control, and you have to make it ring the same way that this really controlled placing does, right? And so what has inevitably happened, as you can hear in the recording, is I go, and I land with too much weight on the C sharp, especially here, right? So that's the difficulty with the left hand, and this takes a lot of practice. And I think the other thing that compounded the issue for me was because I got really concerned about becoming desynced from my right hand here, right? And so as a result, because I became very focused on the rhythm and very focused on just articulating this D, it got clunky, it got a little bit blocky, and I land too hard on D, right? Like that. Just as things to keep in mind, right? It's hard to sing this way with the left hand, but you have to kind of make do, right? What should I have done better? I should have perhaps not lifted as high, perhaps been closer and applied weight this way, perhaps less staccato because I should have known that I was going to be prone to being too sharp on it, right? But there is a crescendo which helps hide it a little bit, right? So it's not too bad, but it's there. It's like there's an accent. It's kind of bad. But this is much better. This is better because, again, now the melody has been inverted, right? Now it's... Right, well, it hasn't been inverted, but it's now lower and I'm able to play like those... Right? That's easier to play on the fourth, third fingers, right? Than the first. And even sometimes the second. So... And again, you'll still hear it, right? The D comes out a little bit too sharp, or too hot. My right hand is a bit too sparkly for my taste. I wish it was a little bit more mellow, a little bit more glued together. But I think back when I recorded this was something that was intentionally done. So I guess my tastes have changed. Nice. This is how pieces grow with you, I guess, and how your interpretations change over time. Oh yeah. So there's no explicit crescendo right in here, but it feels like there's a crescendo, which is why I added in. And I guess I defy the score in that way. Right, so there's sforzatos there on a staccato, right? So it's like almost like an accent, right? And then bring it back down again. And then build. Now there's a lot of weight going into my left hand. And then we get it's like the direction, right? Again, playing with direction, where are we going? So left hand has the melody, and then we are going to this D sharp here, right? And it's a forte piano, so weight into the keys, and then back off, right? Left hand, strong on the G sharp, the first one, and then back off. Like that. So. The build. And an instant drop back, right? It should have been a little bit more overt, but I'm kind of bad at playing tremolos. Again, I forget if I mentioned this earlier. This, for me, was recorded the same day I did the Mozart, so there's still a lot of like coming back nerves, which is not an excuse, but I'm saying it as though it were. There's like, again, coming back, the feeling of performing again, being nervous about that, and also still not being in total control of the piano or having my entire touch back. I mean, say what you will, right? This was not done that well. I am generally weak at tremolos, and I'm still bad at tremolos. I'm bad at controlling the bass, as it were, but it really comes out here with a bit of a too strong of, right? Especially combined with the pedal. But the vibe we're going through for here, if this part back here, right, is the softest that we're getting in the piece. This is the gluiest we're getting in the piece, right? So what I'm doing is, like, my whole body is tensed up. Right? So in order to articulate, right, I'm putting like a whole ton of weight into my fingers like this. Like I'm leaning into the keys. And driving like almost all my arm weight from here, like I'm leaning over the keys, right, into these three fingers, right, in order to articulate them. So my left hand is just doing this thing, right, no weight going there, and all my weight is going into these three fingers, and I'm still playing the thirds, right, with my remaining two fingers, with my first and my second, but because no weight's going into them, they naturally become unvoiced. So putting it all together. So it's important, again, keep the wrist low, level with the hand. If your wrist is up here, you're gonna hurt your wrist. Your wrist is down here, you're gonna hurt your wrist. And this is more advanced, right? Again, anything with flat fingers, anything with a lot of body weight, if you're a beginner, don't worry about it, don't do it, or don't play this piece, right? Do something else. Work on your finger dexterity first, strengthen your fingers so that they will be able to handle this later, right? This requires more flexibility, more control, and more strength in the fingers because you're leaning your whole body into your fingers. But here in the video, right, you can see my right arm is super tense, and it's because I'm driving that weight there. And now, shift, right? Shift to a different texture, right? Super sparkly. Now the pedal is not there anymore, right? But the left hand is still rumbling. And now we're back to driving that weight. So there's, I don't know what these are called. I should know. Mortatos, I think. But staccatos with a slur. And how you play those is you lift, right? There's an overt lift, but you're keeping the pedal held. At least this is how you do it for this piece. And so it creates a different texture than if you were to try to connect, right? But also a different texture than if you were just like, obviously, just playing staccato. So it's an interesting articulation. And I'm changing on the half. So there's a lot of voicing and weight that's going into the four fingers and the fifth fingers to bring out the B sharp, the C, and the C sharp, and then the D sharp. So, and there's crescendo, right? And now super gluey with a lot of weight, and you can even see me, right? You saw him, you lean in, partially because, you know, feeling the piece, but also much more because I'm putting weight into the keys, right? Right, I'm rolling that weight with my wrist up to my pinky, my forefinger. And then the relaxation here, right? After we built and then had the slight decrescendo, it comes entirely from no longer driving weight into the keys this way, and now it's just the weight coming down like this, right? From up and down, like as I mentioned earlier, and then even more so, starting from the keys, right? The fingers aren't lifted off the keys. weight comes down. And so all the keys come down at the same time as well. So wait, coming in. Right, see the placing? Spicy. So, forte piano, right? Drive in a lot on the first C sharp. To set it off. Like, it's almost like kicking the rest of the run into action. So. Wait. On beat. Does a little bit uneven. Smooth, connected, flowing. The pedal that's clear. Crescendo. Stay. Breathe. Good. So this one's different, right, from before. Again, this is now in the tonic key in C sharp minor, but before it was in G sharp, right, in dominant key. But we also got the bum, right? It starts piano on the beat, bum, bum. So it's almost like yum, bum. But here we just go dum, which gives it like such a different like feeling, right? It's you're crying, you're angry, and you're like yearning, mournful in the same way, in a very similar way, but it's being expressed in a different way. One, because the key is different, but because you're going into it different. It almost comes out, right? Like swells out of you, right? Instead of just bum, instead of landing on it, it's like dum, it just comes out and so mournful and soulful. Yeah, I just love these sections, so I could sing them for days. In fact, practicing these things, you should sing a lot, right? Because it helps you phrase, it helps you figure out where you need to lift. Where you naturally take a breath, that's where you should probably lift a little. How you naturally like build, right, when you're singing, that's maybe what you should do in playing too. So actually, these sections I practice a lot by singing, right? Singing while playing, as I just demonstrated. So learn how to sing. Maybe I should start a singing channel and start singing covers in Japanese. Who knows? So there's a little bit of rubato in the right hand. I don't know if you caught it earlier, or it sounds like it. Yeah, there's like a little bit of a pull. Again, felt more than overt. And coming, it's more spicy, more rattly, right? But not rattly in a bad way. Land with the weight, not weight, right? Built into this. Now all finger, almost like staccato, but not quite. This was a bit short. So yeah, if it's too short, then it sounds bad, right? Because you're like landing on the note, right? Right? You want to land and have that finality to end the phrase, but if it's too short, then it's like, where'd it go, right? So I played it too short. Basically, that's the point that I'm trying to make. The syncopations was a little bit off there. Yeah, a little bit off. But another soaring experience, grand, wide, right? And with the way. But instead of ending like the last time, we end on a forte, right? In the same dynamic, we end on a piano. Again, Beethoven master surprises and laughs. Right when we were expecting a forte, he bamboozles us with a piano. And it's like, what just happened? Like, nani, right? And you get that staccato section again. So we got the staccato, right, like before. Again, the on beat on the important notes, like that, and this part. Adding some of that pedal to give it a little bit of a touch, but also still maintain the staccato-ness. Okay, here's the difference. Okay, so here in the score is written, right? So this is another difference from the beginning. First we had the landing in piano, right? Instead of landing in forte. But here, instead of crescendo, and then into a forte, it just stays piano and goes subito forte, right? And it's like a bit of a contrast from the start. Again, the surprises, the tricks, whatever. So the way that I do this, right, this time is by playing, you know, very, very staccato-like. It's not written staccato, but I think the touch here is still very staccato. And much more obviously this time, I'm adding on beat to the entire forte section on each note, on each eighth. I either do it a bit poorly or it was intentional, but it doesn't sound that bad, right? Like you can hear it drag a little bit, but it's fine, you know, for my taste. But it's another little thing, right? To create more contrast, more of that divide between piano and forte, because it's hard to play super piano when you've got these big chords, right? And that on beat really helps create that separation. And again, remember, it's a pushing it, right? It looks like I'm just going like this, right? But there's a bit of a push in so that it doesn't get harsh. So no pedal on these this time, but you could the swell was much more present, right? There's the build, decrease, right? It's like letting out the breath again into the super smooth section. Fingers flat, splayed out, right? Arm, finger, arm, right? Slight phrasing, but you can almost like feel the tension. Like if this was a stringed instrument, or if this was by a voice, right? You would sing it or play it that way. You add a little bit of emphasis into the note, and so obviously you can't do that on the piano, right? But just by shifting the weight and playing with that direction, you can change. It feels like you can change the color of the note and the tonality of the note essentially by just shifting your weight and by feeling it. It's very abstract. I don't know how to describe it other than that, but it somehow works. So there we go. We got the gradient again. Smooth, more spicy, more and more spicy. Land, and this is as spicy as it gets, and rip. Okay, so we blunder here pretty bad. And part of it is because I feel like I rattle in, like, and I'm almost losing a bit of control. But also, this is, you know, an arpeggio that has not come out anywhere else, and I probably just didn't practice this enough, or, you know, I was out, again, with a combination of factors, out of place. So this brings up an interesting point that I want to talk about with performances. Is how do you recover after you make an accident or make a mistake like this, after you have a hiccup? Because like this was not big enough to derail me, right? But sometimes, even though it's not enough to derail you off your performance, it still does significant mental damage to you, where, like, I know for myself, right, at this moment in time, as I'm playing, I'm thinking to myself, holy crap, I messed up. Is that noticeable? And I guess worst of all, for a recording, does this mean that this take is bad and I'll have to do it over? And so getting your way through all these thoughts is quite a challenge, right? Because, like, if you entertain them, then you begin to doubt yourself even more. If you doubt yourself even more, then you run that much more of a risk of actually derailing somewhere else. So the strat and the solution for this, I think, is while trying to clear your mind, right, on the next part, while trying to reorganize your thoughts and restabilize, you need to have points where you are super confident in, so that once you get there, you can completely refocus and shift your mindset back to someplace good. For instance, this run, not good. But the next one is much more comfortable and much more easy. So you can hear it. It sounds a little bit uneven, but that's because I'm recovering. But what note am I playing to? The G, the F double sharp, right? Because I've practiced this section so many times, right? With metronome and stuff like that. And because this is such a solid note in the left hand that, like, once I get there, then I can reorient. So this whole next run is dedicated to me building my own mental preparation to get to here, to refocus. I call them railroad markers. These work for even if you get derailed, right? Like, let's say, for example, if I was playing this one and I completely forgot what I was doing. If you don't have spots that you can jump to, you're completely screwed. So having a spot, like, if I derail here, I can think, okay, I jump forward, right? Immediately pick back up and we're good to go. It's going to be noticeable, but it's better than stopping because stopping is like the worst thing ever when you're performing. And the reason why I know this is because I stopped in the middle of a competition and the judge was kind enough to explain this to me while giving me a failing score. So, go me. Alright, so this section here depends on who you ask or who plays, right? In a lot of recordings, like, so for example, I'm thinking Valentina Lisitsa's, she drops the tempo significantly here, like almost all, like way down. It's like, right? But other people will say this is supposed to be taken strictly in tempo, and so Beethoven wants the doubling of the speed, so we double the speed. I lean on the strict tempo side as usual, right? But like I do believe that there's a bit of room for flexibility, but I think it sounds so much better when it's played in tempo. And it just has more of that like swoosh, that rush up to the final note. This takes a lot of practice with a metronome to line up exactly, and a lot of slow practice at that. And to be fair, right, I've heard it said that you can't play it at 185. You can't play it that fast, like at 185, but to people who say that, I think if you can play a chord, you can play this at 185 or like 190, even if not even faster. So that's my defense of people like Valentina Lisitsa. They're not dropping the tempo because they can't play it. It's an artistic choice. Same thing here. Oh, and then we have 16ths, right? Beethoven writes 16ths. 16ths, so the tempo halves, giving that section like more like emphasis. It's like Beethoven, instead of writing a ritardando, wrote it out for us. And that's almost how nitpicky Beethoven is with the tempo, lending credence to my interpretation that tempo is more strict, right? Because it's like, he could have written a ritardando. He could have said, oh, Beethoven could be interpreted, oh, pull here, right? But instead, it's 16ths. What could he possibly mean other than he wants the tempo to half? But that's just me. We stay there, stay on the fermata, right? We stay here because, one, for breathing, right? Breathe again. Dum bum, right? You wouldn't sing the next part by just going into it, right? You would take a breath. So we're sticking on this note to breathe, but also because this is the last to be recovering from my mistake in order to then play the ending well. Oh, that was kind of bad, right? Like I came off the pedal at the same time I went down and came up. And I played it too much of a staccato, right? There's different varying degrees of staccato because this is the beginning of a phrase, right? Like dum, bum, we want to hear the dum. But if you play too short, then it becomes lost and it doesn't make the impact it's supposed to. So I played it too short, and combined with the poor pedaling, then we completely lost the note. So you hear some of what I talked about earlier with the difficulty in phrasing with the left hand. My thumb is a bit too heavy. And I am focusing a little bit more on the rhythm and making sure it's lined up than I probably ought to. But I do pull the tempo a little bit, right? These low notes are really nice to play because you get to roll your wrist and drop the weight. Da, 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 da. Right, and then we have the pull and tempo right here at the end as well to help set up for this. And so again, the reason why I'm so flexible with the tempo here is because I feel like the whole piece I've demonstrated that I can do this in tempo. I understand the rules, and now this is the last time that I get to really sing this section out. It's the last time that I get to vent this anger, right? This bitter yearning, and let it come out and swell out of me, right? Bum, bum, da 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 dum, da 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 da. This is the last time it's gonna happen. This is the last time I get to be so vulnerable in this piece, and so I want to really take the time. And it almost becomes like romantic, right? In the way that it's played, romantic as in the era, not my feelings, but. Right, with this sort of pull, the stretch, da dum da 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 dum da 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 da, right, and then da 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 again and again, and more and more and more. So the tempo drops a few clicks. I take a lot more time, and it just sounds, it is given that space that it needs to breathe, I think. I really do like this section in slower tempos. You see that pull and the crescendo? The swelling in the left hand, right? Emphasis on the G sharp. The left hand swells with it, right? It's important to be mindful of the dynamics there in the left hand as well, even when it's doing an Alberti bass or a tremolo, right? It swells with the right hand. It provides the this foundation of support for the melody of the right. If it just stays flat, then it sounds kind of uninteresting and boring and dull. So make sure the left hand swells with the right. Swell, you know, as pull, stretch. You know, it's like giving more and more, you know? You can almost like envision each one of these swells a little bit more than the last, right? And then we get into the nice staccato section. Ah, nice. So that's something to note, right? When you drop the tempo, you can, again, with these melodic sections in Beethoven even, right, you can always drop a few clicks in the tempo, right? As long as it's not too overt, in my opinion. But if you choose to drop the tempo, you always need to come back up to the original tempo in a way that sounds good. And so we do this with this crescendo here, right? So in the crescendo, and because of the increase in staccato and the aggressiveness of the playing, that's where I come back up in tempo as well, and it works really well. So if we listen to it again. Right. And now this practice with a metronome. Hold down the pedal all the way through. Weight into the left hand. Articulate the first notes of each slur. And nail those rhythm changes. An interesting thing to know is if we go by the strictest interpretation, right, of the tempo, that this is probably the biggest bottleneck. So you have a group of 4, and then group of 5, and then 3 tripleted 16ths, and then 32nd notes. And that's like virtually impossible to play at like 185. But this brings up an interesting point. It's like when you're practicing slow, you want to be able to feel these things. Because for whatever reason, when you're playing fast, even if they're not obvious and overt, or like someone can like count them out and say, oh, he did that, right? According to the metronome marks. The fact that you hear it in your head and you feel it as you're playing it somehow makes it come out. And this is very abstract and very strange, but it somehow works, right? It's almost like for violinists and other string players, for whatever reason, after you practiced a whole bunch, whatever, you know, a piece, you got the notes down. When you are able to hear the note in your head before you play it, for whatever reason, your body just moves, and most of the time it comes out in tune, right? And it's nutty. It's crazy. Same thing with piano. A lot of this comes in with the touch, right? So a lot of the things that we talked about earlier, like if I hear this G sharp before I play it, then again, this is saying after practice, like it's not like I'm gonna sit down, sight read a new piece, and if I can hear it in my head because I have perfect pitch or whatever, it's gonna be perfect, or maybe it works that way. Who knows? But if I hear this G before I play it, then most of the time is going to turn out right. 98% of the time, I would say. And likewise for other slower pieces as well, right? For Chopin Nocturne in B flat, I believe. Playing this B flat, I can already hear the G in my head, right? So, and it comes out right? For whatever reason, because I practiced, right? I practiced a whole bunch of touches, I practiced whatever. It's like that data's been imprinted into my brain, into my hands. Because I have decided what I want, the body just, for whatever reason, moves to produce that sound. And again, super abstract, super weird how it works, but this is how it works a lot of times. And so obviously the best way to perform, best way to think about this sometimes, right? I would say if I'm performing at 95%, then most of the notes that I'm playing, I hear before I play it, right? In practice, that has like very rarely ever happened, but at the very least, important notes, right? Like the G sharp, like I want to hear the melody before I play it. I want to hear the first measure before I start playing, stuff like that, right? And it just works. It just works somehow. So again, here with this run, impossible to play in tempo, but you want to have that feel. And if you feel it and if you hear it in your head, then a lot of times it'll come out And I don't think it particularly came out for me because it just sounds like I just played faster and played as fast as I could to get up the rest of the run. So that's bad on my part. So you kind of hear the 5, but then the end there, you don't. Oh, the G. So I remember at this point I was thinking like really like all things to mess up. I mess up the trill that I can't hide. 1, by fluttering the pedal like with something else. But 2, something that I've played like 100,000 times and I've never messed up in this way before, right? And it was very frustrating because it's kind of weird. Why would my second finger drop to a G? But it happens, right? Stuff like this happens. And how do you deal with it? Like slightly flutter the pedal, maybe let it ring out. Get it out of the resonance of the piano, right, or whatever. But I don't know. It was disheartening, nonetheless. And I didn't flutter the pedal. Here we go. So this is written almost like a cadenza. And so the feeling that I'm going for is like weightiness, like a rock rolling down a mountain slowly. But then as it rolls, the mountain increases in friction or like levels out, or the slope levels out. So there's like starts off slow and then slow and low. And then crests, right? Gets loud and fast and then slows down again until we get to the quarters, right? And that's almost like, you know, like coming all the way down, like duh, duh, duh. Like I want to feel each note, almost like each note is its own thing. And this is like where the lack of like we can play without direction because each note is the end point. So again, the curve is like, you know, like that. So it's like up, and then the middle is like where we crest, and then it comes back down. And it's all like if you think of it in terms of like a weight metaphor, almost like like you become too heavy to move. It somehow works. That's what I did. So this is Adagio. I'm counting out beats here, right? I'm counting out the beats, and right before it started, I again heard in my head what tempo I was playing at earlier. So I jumped back to another section that I played, perhaps like. So I hear in my head, I forget exactly what I used, but. So in my head. Okay. And that's how I find the original tempo, tempo 1. Or another way to do it is to remember or general feel of how much energy you need to put in to achieve the tempo. That I find only really works if you're really pushing yourself to the max to get to a tempo. If this is the fastest you can play and you know the feeling of you trying to play your fastest, then that might help also with getting there. But it's much more handier to, or much more foolproof to remember what you played earlier and try to match that. So finding the original tempo, found it. Good. Oh, missed a note, but that's okay. Okay, very low, right? You can see my arm just moving very slightly up and down, and then like a little bit. Nice. Okay, so before we finish the run, because it's kind of epic. So here, the editor, again, has written in a crescendo, in parentheses. I disagree. In this instance, I disagree. Sometimes, I try both out, the crescendo and the subito forte. And I prefer the subito forte because I want it to like almost come out. It's like, you know, explode, right? And it's just like power, glitz, angry, like whatever. Throw whatever like sparkly metaphor you want to throw in there, all the way run to the end while articulating the first note of each quarter. Because they're the interesting note, dum 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 dum, right, all the way down. And this is weight, but lots and lots and lots of finger. So you'll see how high my fingers go. Look how high, yeah, there we go. My fingers high, and pushing in with weight to articulate the first note of each quarter. And then weight, right? So even though it's staccato, we're holding it for a little bit to give it finality. So it still feels like a staccato, but it's not a, you know. So. Bum, bum, And so again, right, because I'm coming off the keys so quickly, that's why my hands clench up, right, when I'm coming up. It's both flourishy, but also, you know, almost like practical, right, to come up that way. Yeah, man, it's the third movement of the Moonlight Sonata. Now go practice it for yourself, or go listen to my recording again, like up there, or there. All right, thanks for sticking this one through with me. I know it was a bit long. And again, I really hope if you are someone picking up this piece or looking to learn it at some point, that this gives you a lot of ideas to work with. And a lot of techniques that you can use to help your interpretation and your expression. And if you're just someone who listens to this for fun, I hope that this lets you hear a bit more of the depth that goes into someone else's performance as well. Gosh, I love me my Moonlight Sonata. Now, as usual, this video is brought to you by my music production company, Just Be Records. Links are in the description. If you need help with mixing or mastering, anything of that nature, hit me up and I'll get you straightened out. Remember to hit that like button, hit subscribe if you want more of this content, and leave a comment below telling me what you want me to review next. I'm working on several things and going through and sketching out several videos as it is. So if you want to have influence on what goes on, let me know down below. If this has piqued your interest for more classical music, click here for my classical playlist. If you want to watch more analyses and stuff like that, click here for more Watts in the Performance. And until next time, peace.